Episode 6, Building Alternative Reality, the Media Ecosystem. So Bannon understood something that most people on the left missed, which is that you don't win by having better arguments in existing media spaces, you win by creating an entirely separate information ecosystem where your narratives are the only ones people hear. How they built a separate information world. When Bannon ran Barbarite News, he wanted something different, a platform where outrage and scandal drove traffic and where every story reinforced a particular worldview about the country under threat from immigrants, globalists, and cultural elites. Barbarite operated on what you call scandal as oxygen, meaning the site needed constant controversy to survive and thrive. Every headline was designed to provoke, every story framed as evidence of decline or betrayal by elites. The content wasn't meant to inform readers about complex issues, but to tell them what they already believed and make them angrier about it. So this created a feedback loop where readers came for the outrage, shared the outrage, and returned for more outrage. And the advertising revenue followed the traffic. After leaving the White House, Bannon started his War Room podcast, which operates on a similar principle but reaches people in a different way. So, podcasts are intimate. You're listening to someone's voice directly in your ears while you're driving, doing the shopping, going to the gym, and that creates a sense of personal connection that reading an article doesn't. Bannon talks to his audience like they're in on something together, like they're part of an informed group who understand what's really happening while everyone else is being fooled. The podcast format also allows him to speak for hours without constraints, so he can develop complex narratives, interview guests who reinforce his worldview, and respond to current events in real time without editors, fact checkers, or requirements to present alternative viewpoints. Then there are like Telegram channels and other encrypted messaging platforms where his supporters organize and share information. These operate as closed communities where people feel safe saying things they might not say publicly, and where moderators can remove anyone who questions the dominant narrative, creating an echo chamber where everyone reinforces everyone else's beliefs. This happens on the left as well, so we can't fool ourselves about that. So, TikTok, Instagram, and the new information war. What Bannon started has evolved into something far more sophisticated and widespread on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, where the alternative reality ecosystem has taken over in ways that make Barbarite almost look quaint. On these platforms, you have news accounts that present themselves as legitimate sources, but are actually just partisan outlets pushing specific narratives. You have influencers who comment on political events to their hundreds and thousands of followers, shaping how young people understand what's happening in the world. You have comment sections that get flooded with coordinated messaging, the same slogans repeated over and over again until they start to feel like common sense rather than propaganda, or they start to feel like reality. So I watched a Reform UK live stream on Instagram recently, and the comment section was absolutely flooded with repeated slogans like "We want remigration." That appeared a lot, and that comes from Bannon. Getting Islam out of the country is what matters. That showed up a lot as well. Reignite the British Empire, or things like lefties don't respect the culture and want to replace it with Islam by introducing Islam to the youth and mess with people's minds. So they're necessarily organic comments from different people expressing their thoughts. Some of them are coordinated campaigns where the same messages get pushed by multiple accounts to create the impression of overwhelming consensus. But what actually happens is because they're hearing those same slogans, it does become organic in a sense, because then people like copy paste those slogans. They start to repeat what they have heard a million times. So when someone is scrolling and they see the same phrase 50 times in a comment section, it starts to feel that that's what everyone thinks, even though it might be 10 accounts posting the same thing multiple times and then a few people who have, seen those messages, like them, and decided to use them as well. There are whole accounts now dedicated to spreading these messages, and they're using things like ChatGPT's voice to read out their propaganda. And this is like quite clever because people have been conditioned to think that AI is objective or neutral because it was in the beginning. You hear what sounds like ChatGPT presenting information in that calm, authoritative AI voice, and your brain registers it as factual and unbiased. Because surely a machine has no agenda, but it's a trick. They're just using text to speech technology to make ChatGPT read out their own propaganda, their own lies and distortions, and that AI voice makes it sound legitimate and objective when it's nothing of the sort. And this is more insidious than Barbarite because it doesn't even look like media in the traditional sense. It looks like your friend sharing content, like popular influencers giving their take, ordinary people expressing opinions in comment sections, neutral AI presenting facts. The manipulation is harder to spot because it's distributed across thousands of accounts and mixed in with genuine content. Young people, especially, are getting their news and political information from TikTok and Instagram, where the algorithm shows them content based on what they've engaged with before. So, creating personalized information bubbles that make Barbright's echo chamber look open by comparison. So, if you watch one video about immigration concerns, the algorithm feeds you 50 more, each one more extreme than the last, until you're deep in content about remigration and replacement theory without ever consciously choosing to seek that out. And please remember, it was Bannon and friends that started talking about remigration, replacement theory, and mass deportations, which we've seen in America and is now spreading to the UK. And I'm worried about where it will go next. The speed matters too, because a false claim can spread to millions of people in hours through short videos and reposted content. And by the time everyone has fact checked it, the narrative is already established, and the people who saw the original false content have moved on to the next outrage. So, using fake news as a weapon. One of the most effective tactics in building this alternative ecosystem has been appropriating the term fake news and weaponizing it against any journalism that contradicts their narrative. Originally, fake news meant literally fabricated stories designed to look like news articles, the kind of thing Russian troll farms were creating during the 2016 election. But Bannon and Trump flipped the term and started using it to describe any journalism that contradicted their narrative or reported facts they found inconvenient. When a newspaper published an article, sources and evidence that made Trump look bad, he'd call it fake news. When journalists fact checked false statements, that was fake news. The term stopped meaning fabricated content and started meaning any journalism that didn't support their agenda. This delegitimized traditional media in the eyes of their supporters. So when those outlets reported something damaging, even when it was true, their audience was already primed to dismiss it as lies. Once you taught people to automatically reject mainstream sources, You've made them dependent on your outlets for what's true. Then you can tell them whatever you want. The BBC reports a scandal. Fake news didn't happen. Their own media tells them the opposite. See, this is what they don't want us to know, type thing. So it doesn't matter that the BBC had actual evidence or that their outlet just made something up. Traditional media's been discredited so thoroughly that people will believe comfortable lies over uncomfortable facts, as long as those lies come from sources they've been taught to trust. Truth and lies basically swapped places. Real journalism became fake news, and actual fake news became the truth the mainstream media won't tell you. People can't tell the difference between legitimate reporting they don't like and complete fabrication anymore because they've been trained to dismiss anything from traditional sources, no matter what the evidence says. The scandal as oxygen model worked perfectly with this because every time mainstream outlets ran stories critical of Trump, Farage, Meloni, that became content for the alternative ecosystem about how corrupt and biased those outlets had become. So, why traditional media can't compete? Traditional journalism operates under constraints that alternative media doesn't have, like verifying information before publishing, presenting multiple perspectives on controversial issues, correcting errors when they occur, and maintaining distance between editorial content and advertising revenue. That's what they're supposed to do, and the problem is they haven't really been doing that recently, which is another reason why all this alternative reality and this, media one-sided ecosystem really has taken root. So these constraints are supposed to produce more reliable information, which does make traditional journalism slower and more expensive and less emotionally satisfying than what alternative media provides. So when Barbara publishes an inflammatory headline, they get immediate traffic. But when traditional outlets spent months investigating something, alternative media has already shaped how their audience thinks about that topic through dozens of pieces that came out way faster. Traditional journalism also tries to present information that might contradict what you believe, whilst alternative media tells people they're right, the other side is evil, and here's more evidence to confirm what you already think, which is emotionally much more appealing than being told a situation is complicated. The business model has also collapsed in ways that benefit alternative media, with newspapers losing advertising revenue, laying off journalists, and struggling to maintain infrastructure for serious reporting, while someone can run a podcast or a TikTok account with minimal overheads and reach millions without the cost of traditional operations. So, what can we do about it? Building trustworthy information sources to counter this ecosystem is harder than it sounds because you're competing with content that's designed to be emotionally satisfying and ideologically reinforcing, whilst trying to provide information that's accurate but might not be what people want to hear. You can't compete by just being more rigorous or more factual because that's not what's drawing people to alternative media in the first place. People go there because those sources make them feel understood, give them a sense of community, and confirm their worldview, and provide clear villains to blame for their frustrations. What you need instead are information sources that are trustworthy and accurate, but also speak to what people actually feel and care about. This means creating media that acknowledges people's real concerns rather than just dismissing them, that builds community rather than just broadcasting information, and tells compelling stories rather than just presenting data. Some of this already exists in the form of independent journalists on Substack, YouTube, who have built audiences based on consistent, honest reporting about specific topics they care deeply about. These creators have often more credibility with their audiences than traditional outlets because people feel they know the person behind the work and can evaluate their trustworthiness directly. And also because the mainstream media has become more and more biased over the years, especially because they're all owned by rich billionaires or Russian oligarchs, even. We've even seen it with the BBC. When you find someone doing solid work on topics you care about, paying for their content helps sustain an alternative to both mainstream media and the far right ecosystem. Local journalism also matters more than people realize because it's harder to create completely separate information realities about things happening in your own community where people can see the results directly. Supporting local newspapers, attending local council meetings, and paying attention to what's actually happening in your area rather than just consuming national or international news helps ground you in verifiable reality. So, creating your own information networks with people you trust also helps. So, instead of just consuming media passively, you're actively discussing what you're reading and hearing with others who can point out when something doesn't make sense or when you're being manipulated. So, this could be a group chat with friends where you share articles and discuss them, or regular meetups where you talk about what's happening. So, media literacy education matters a lot, which means learning and teaching others how to evaluate sources, spot manipulation tactics, understand how algorithms shape what you see, and recognize when something is designed to provoke outrage rather than inform. So it includes understanding that just because something sounds like it's being read by AI doesn't mean it's objective or factual. It means someone is using technology to make their propaganda sound more authoritative. The goal is building information sources that are trustworthy, that acknowledge complexity while remaining accessible. So that means also keeping the costs down, that build community around shared understanding rather than shared enemies, and that help people make sense of the world rather than just confirming what they already believe. It's slower and it's harder work than what Bannon has built because trustworthy information requires verification and sometimes telling people things they don't want to hear. But it's the only way to counter in the long term because alternative realities eventually collide with actual reality. And when they do, the people who've been living in information ecosystems built on outrage and conspiracy find themselves completely unprepared to deal with what's actually happening. It's like coming out of a cult. I also recommend following sources that oppose your viewpoint but aren't living on another planet. And you can also check out ground news to find your blind spots.